So maybe you're new to writing papers, or maybe you're not, but you've struggled with getting good grades on papers in the past. Here are a few tips for optimizing your chances of getting the best possible grade. Now, my personal experience is with writing argumentative papers in the social sciences, so these tips will apply best to those. They may not apply quite so well to something like an English paper, but I think a few of these tips will be applicable to just about any kind of paper you will write. If your instructor gives you specific instructions about how to write the paper, look them over, make sure you understand them, and be sure to ask for clarification if anything seems unclear. Make sure you're following the style that they asked for, APA, Chicago, or whatever, and make sure that you know how these work. As you are writing your paper, make sure you're consulting these instructions frequently to be certain that you are following them correctly. If the instructions that you have contradict any of the tips that I give you, just ignore those tips or try to modify them in some way that's applicable to your project. Decide what you want to write about, but try not to decide exactly what your argument is going to be right away. A lot of people get an idea for an argument that they want their paper to make before they've even really done the research, and then they try to make their research fit their preconceived conclusion. This does not make for a good paper. Instead of coming up with a position you'd like to argue, come up with a question you would like to investigate. For example, rather than planning to write a paper that says Ronald Reagan was primarily responsible for the Iran-Contra scandal, you should start your research with the question, was Ronald Reagan primarily responsible for the Iran-Contra scandal? As you do your research, you may discover that the answer is yes, or that the answer is no. Once you've decided what question you want to research, tell your instructor so your instructor can let you know where you can look to find information relevant to your topic. Or give you advice regarding whether your question is way too broad or way too narrow, or is otherwise inappropriate for your project. If this happens, don't get stressed out about it. It's better to know that kind of thing before you really delve into the research for your paper. Once you've decided on a topic for your paper, go to the library or go to the internet and start poking around for information relevant to it. Since you are investigating a question rather than looking for information that supports one conclusion or another, you should try to find sources that argue each side of the issue. Look for sources that argue one side, look for sources that argue the other, and look for debates and rebuttals to the major arguments having to do with your topic. A word of caution here though. Some topics have been very complexly debated and at great length. So depending on how complex your paper is supposed to be, you may want to narrow your focus. Again, ask your instructor how deeply you should delve into your topic. As you are reading through your research, make notes about ideas that may be relevant, and copy down quotes from authors that may come in handy when you are explaining their argument. Also, as you're reading through your information, write down any questions you may have about things that your research doesn't clearly or adequately explain. This can give you ideas for further research and help you come to a conclusion about the answer to your research question. To keep things organized, you should make a document into which you copy your research and a separate document into which you copy your own ideas. Keep these on separate pieces of paper or in separate word processor files. It's also a good idea to carry around a notepad or cue cards or something on which you can write ideas if you happen to come up with something while you're waiting for the bus or whatever. Once you think you've done enough research to answer your research question, write up a quick summary explaining the question you've investigated and what you think the answer to that question is. For example, Ronald Reagan was primarily responsible for Iran-Contra, or Ronald Reagan was not primarily responsible for Iran-Contra. And add a few sentences explaining why you've come to the conclusion that you have. This will serve as a rough draft of your paper's introduction. Next, write an outline explaining how your paper is going to be structured. In point form, present 1. The introduction explaining the question you've investigated and what your conclusion is. 2. The argument for your position. 3. The arguments against your position. 4. A section where you explain why you think that the arguments in favor of your position are better than the arguments against it. And then 5. Your conclusion. Just write a paragraph restating the position that you've taken and why you have taken it. This should be the main structure of your paper. Once you've done this outline, present it to your instructor to make sure that you're on the right track. Be prepared for your instructor to say you have too much information here, or not enough information there, or your argument isn't logical, etc. If your instructor gives you a lot of criticism, don't get discouraged. Again, the whole point of consulting your instructor is to make sure that you're on the right track before the paper actually gets graded. A lot of people procrastinate when it comes to actually writing the paper because they think of writing a paper as sitting down, staring at a blank page, and filling it with words until you have a finished product. This is the hardest possible way to write a paper. If you have followed the 4 previous steps, most of your paper should already essentially be written. You've already collected all of your research, you have all of your arguments, now all you need to do is put things into the structure guided by your outline. Once you have done this, you have completed your first draft. Once you have your first draft done, read it through to clear up any typographical errors, any grammatical errors, spelling errors, anything like that. Once you've done that, you can give it over to your instructor once again. Now you may be thinking, should I really be bugging my instructor with all of these copies of my work? If your instructor is a good one, yes. The best instructors, the best professors and teachers will at least look at your proposal, your outline, and your first draft. However, you may not have one of the best instructors and they may draw the line at looking at your outline. That's fine. If that's the case, then you'll have to be your own editor. Read through your paper, make improvements, read it through again, make more improvements, and repeat this process as many times as you think necessary. It's been my experience that the more times you do this, the more times you look over your paper and make revisions, the better the grade you get. I hope that helps.